For years, the military balance in South Asia felt settled. India was widely seen as the dominant air power in the region. Bigger economy, larger defense budget, more aircraft, more pilots, more global partnerships. It was one of those assumptions that almost never got questioned, like gravity. You didn't need to debate it. Everyone knew how the hierarchy worked. And then, almost quietly, that certainty started to crack. At a recent air show, reports began circulating that China's J-35, also known as the FC-31, is moving much closer to operational readiness. Not a concept, not a paper design, an aircraft that is nearing the point where air forces can actually deploy it. Even more striking was who might get it first. Pakistan. According to multiple reports, Pakistan could field 2 squadrons of the J-35 within the next 2 years. If that happens, Pakistan would become the first country in South Asia to operate a 5th-generation stealth fighter. Let that sink in for a moment. Not India, not a future indigenous program, not a sometime in the 2030s projection, but Pakistan, with an operational stealth aircraft in the 2020s. This isn't just about one new jet. In modern air warfare, 5th-generation fighters aren't just faster or sleeker versions of older planes. They change how wars are fought. Stealth, sensor fusion, data sharing. These aircraft are designed to see first, strike first, and survive in environments where older jets struggled just to stay alive. It's the difference between playing chess and playing checkers on the same board. For decades, India's air dominance in South Asia was treated as a given. Pakistan was seen as capable, yes, but always a step behind. Now, for the first time in a long while, that hierarchy looks fragile. Because here's the contradiction that makes this story so explosive. India is still widely perceived as the region's future air power leader. But Pakistan may soon operate technology that India does not yet have. That gap, even if temporary, matters. Air power isn't just about numbers. It's about timing. Being first changes training, doctrine, confidence, and deterrence. The first Air Force to master a new generation of technology gets years of learning before anyone else catches up. Think of it like smartphones. The first company to master touchscreens didn't just sell a phone, it reshaped the entire market while others scrambled to respond. That's the strategic shock here. If Pakistan fields 5th-generation fighters first, the balance of deterrence shifts. Planning assumptions change, risk calculations change, and the psychological edge, which matters more than people like to admit, moves as well. This isn't about cheering for one side or mocking the other. It's about understanding how quickly the ground is moving under South Asia's air power landscape. So the real question isn't whether the J-35 is perfect or whether it's better or worse than some other jet on paper. The real question is much sharper and much more uncomfortable. If Pakistan gets stealth fighters first, what does that mean for India's long-term air superiority? To understand why this is happening, we need to step back from the aircraft itself and look at the relationship behind it. China and Pakistan don't just cooperate on defense. They've built something closer to a long-term military partnership. For decades, China has supplied Pakistan with fighter jets, missiles, air defense systems, and even helped co-develop platforms like the JF-17. This isn't a one-off arms sale, it's an ecosystem. So when China reaches the point where it's ready to export a 5th-generation fighter, Pakistan naturally sits at the front of the line. From China's perspective, Pakistan is a low-risk, high-value customer. The two countries already share logistics pipelines, training frameworks, and operational doctrine. That matters, because 5th-generation fighters aren't just hard to build, they're hard to integrate. You don't just hand over the keys and say good luck. You need trust, coordination, and years of shared experience. There's also a technical reason this timing matters. One of the biggest question marks around the J-35 has always been its engine. Stealth fighters live or die by engine reliability, power, and heat management. Recent reports suggest the WS-19 engine has reached a level of maturity where China feels confident exporting the platform, not as a prototype, but as a real combat system. That's a big shift. Countries don't export their most sensitive military technology lightly. When they do, it usually means they believe the system is stable enough not to embarrass them or fail in someone else's hands. Now add the geopolitical layer. Many countries, especially Muslim-majority states, are effectively locked out of the F-35 program. The reasons vary: politics, alliances, export restrictions. But the result is the same. No matter how much money they have, the door is closed. That creates a vacuum. If you're a country that wants a fifth-generation fighter and you can't buy American, there are suddenly very few options on the table. Russia's next-generation programs face delays and uncertainty. Europe doesn't have a ready stealth export fighter. That leaves one realistic alternative: China. This is why the J-35 matters beyond Pakistan. It's not just a plane, it's a signal that China is ready to compete in the global stealth fighter market, not just domestically, but internationally. And Pakistan plays a crucial role in that strategy. By operating the J-35 first, Pakistan becomes a demonstration case. Other countries will watch closely. How reliable is it? How does it perform? How quickly can pilots and ground crews adapt? Does it actually change air power dynamics? In other words, Pakistan isn't just buying an aircraft. It's helping China prove that its fifth-generation fighters are no longer experimental, no longer theoretical, but export-ready, combat-capable systems. And once that door opens, the implications stretch far beyond South Asia. Because this isn't just about Pakistan catching up. Once you see why the China-Pakistan deal makes sense, the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. On one side, Pakistan is preparing for a near-term jump into fifth-generation air power. Not in some distant future, not as a concept study, but as a real operational capability within a couple of years. Pilots train, ground crews adapt, doctrine evolves. The clock starts ticking the moment the first aircraft arrive. On the other side is India. India's answer to fifth-generation air combat is the AMCA, the Advanced Medium Combat Aircraft. On paper, it's ambitious, modern, and designed to match global standards. But right now, it exists mostly as presentations, renderings, and design reviews. It's not flying. It's not testing stealth coatings under real conditions. It's not building institutional muscle through daily operations. In simple terms, Pakistan is talking about squadrons. India is still talking about slides. This is where perception and reality begin to drift apart. India's strategic messaging often assumes long-term air dominance as a given. Bigger economy, bigger industrial base, bigger ambitions. And in the long run, that logic makes sense. But air power doesn't wait for long-run potential. It rewards whoever shows up first with usable capability. Think of it like two students preparing for the same exam. One starts studying seriously 2 years earlier. The other plans to study harder later because they're more talented. Talent matters, but time matters too. Timelines are the uncomfortable part of this story. If Pakistan inducts fifth-generation fighters in the 2020s, its Air Force gains years of experience operating stealth platforms before India's AMCA even leaves the ground. Those years aren't just about flying hours. They're about learning what breaks, what works, how to fight, how to hide, and how to integrate sensors, drones, and missiles into a single combat system. That experience compounds. Meanwhile, India's Air Force continues to rely on upgraded 4th-generation and 4.5-generation aircraft while waiting for its next big leap. There's nothing wrong with that, unless your main rival leaps first. And that's the pivot point. For the first time in decades, Pakistan's Air Force may move ahead of India in generation, not just in one niche capability, but in the very category that defines modern air dominance. Even if that advantage is temporary, it still changes the strategic equation. Planning assumptions shift. Deterrence calculations shift. Confidence shifts. This isn't about who will win some hypothetical war tomorrow. It's about momentum. Because in air power, once momentum starts moving in one direction, catching up becomes harder with every passing year. And that brings us straight to the loudest counter-argument of all. The aircraft India already paid heavily for, and the confidence many believe it guarantees. Whenever this topic comes up, one response appears almost instantly. What about Rafale? India's purchase of the French-built Rafale is often presented as the ultimate answer, a guarantee that India's Air Force can handle anything in the region, including stealth fighters. Online, the confidence can be absolute. Some claims go as far as saying Rafale could defeat aircraft like China's J-20 in a real fight. So let's slow this down and look at it clearly. Rafale is a very capable 4.5 generation fighter. It has advanced avionics, strong electronic warfare systems, good sensors, and high-quality weapons. No serious analyst would call it a weak aircraft. But capability doesn't exist in a vacuum. The first issue is generation gap. Fifth-generation fighters are built around stealth from the ground up. That doesn't mean they're invisible. It means they're much harder to detect, track, and target, especially at long ranges. In modern air combat, seeing first often decides everything. If you're detected later, you're already behind. This is where the comparison becomes tricky. Rafale was never designed to be stealthy in the same way. It can reduce its radar signature, but it can't erase it. Against a fifth-generation aircraft using sensor fusion, low observability, and networked data, that difference matters a lot. Then there's numbers. India operates only a few dozen Rafales. Even if each aircraft is excellent, air combat is still influenced by scale. You can't be everywhere at once. You can't rotate aircraft endlessly without fatigue, maintenance, and attrition setting in. Now compare that to an opponent fielding stealth fighters alongside large fleets of supporting aircraft, ground-based sensors, and integrated air defenses. Individual performance starts to matter less than system performance. Cost is another uncomfortable angle. Rafale was purchased at a price many analysts consider extremely high for a non-stealth aircraft. In simple terms, India paid fifth-generation level money for a 4.5 generation platform, while rivals are moving toward actual fifth-generation systems. That doesn't make Rafale a bad jet, but it does raise hard questions about long-term value. And finally, there's complexity. Procurement controversies, customization challenges, and logistical dependence all add friction. None of these issues are unique to India. They're common in high-end defense deals, but they reduce flexibility when time and adaptability matter most. This is where the narrative needs grounding. Confidence is easy. Modern air warfare is not. Air dominance today is decided less by heroic dogfights and more by who controls the sensor picture, who shares data faster, and who can strike without being seen. That's a system problem, not an aircraft problem. Rafale strengthens India's Air Force, no question. But it doesn't erase the reality that the next phase of air combat is being defined by stealth, integration, and timing. And that brings us back to how long it takes to build those capabilities from scratch. Which leads directly to India's long and difficult journey toward an indigenous fighter ecosystem. To really understand where India stands today, you have to look backward. Not just a few years, but decades. India's push to build its own fighter aircraft didn't start recently. It began in the early 1980s with the idea that India should no longer depend heavily on foreign suppliers for core air combat capability. That ambition gave birth to the LCA program, later known as Tejas. On paper, the goal was sensible and forward-looking, a lightweight modern fighter designed and built in India. But reality proved far more complicated. Development stretched on for years, then decades. Engines came from abroad, radars came from abroad, ejection seats, avionics, electronic systems. Many critical components were imported. Integrating all of this into a single, reliable aircraft turned out to be far harder than expected. By the time Tejas finally entered service in the mid-2010s, the world had moved on. To put this in perspective, Tejas was conceived when the Cold War still existed, digital avionics were in their early stages, and China was still flying upgraded versions of older Soviet-era designs. Yet Tejas arrived in operational service nearly 30 years later, in a very different air combat environment. Now, compare that timeline with China's. Over roughly the same period, China moved from modified legacy fighters to the J-10 to large fourth-generation platforms, and eventually to the J-20, a fifth-generation stealth fighter already in service. This difference isn't about intelligence or talent, it's about industrial structure and execution speed. China treated fighter development like an iterative process: build, test, deploy, improve, repeatedly. Mistakes were absorbed quickly. Production scaled early. Operational experience fed directly back into new designs. India, by contrast, often pursued perfection before production. Each delay compounded the next. Testing dragged on. Requirements changed. Integration became more complex with every added foreign subsystem. The result wasn't failure. Tejas flies, fights, and serves. But the cost of time was enormous. And time, in modern air combat, is unforgiving. While India was still refining a fourth-generation light fighter, the global conversation shifted to stealth, sensor fusion, and networked warfare. By the time one milestone was reached, the finish line had moved again. This history matters because it shapes expectations. When people talk about India's next leap, the AMCA, they're not starting from a blank slate. They're building on a record that shows how long complex aerospace programs can take, even with strong political will and real investment. Which brings us to the most uncomfortable question of all. What happens when a fifth-generation fighter exists mostly in the future, while rivals begin flying theirs in the present? This is where the conversation gets serious and, yeah, uncomfortable. India's answer to the fifth-generation challenge is the AMCA, the Advanced Medium Combat Aircraft. In concept, AMCA is meant to do everything a modern stealth fighter should do: low observability, internal weapons, advanced sensors, data fusion, and the ability to operate as part of a larger network that includes drones and other aircraft. On paper, it looks like a proper fifth-generation design, but building a fifth-generation fighter isn't like upgrading a car model. It's more like building a completely new ecosystem from the ground up. To become real, AMCA still needs several major pieces to come together at the same time. First, the engine. A stealth fighter lives and dies by its engine. Power, reliability, fuel efficiency, heat management, all of these affect range, stealth, and combat performance. Developing a high-performance jet engine is one of the hardest engineering problems on Earth. Very few countries have done it successfully, and it usually takes decades. Second, stealth shaping and materials. Stealth isn't just about the aircraft's shape. It's about coatings, manufacturing precision, maintenance discipline, and real-world durability. These things can't be perfected on a computer screen. They require years of testing, flying, braking, fixing, and flying again. Third, sensors and software. Fifth-generation fighters are flying computers. Radar, infrared sensors, electronic warfare systems, and data links all have to work together seamlessly. If the software lags, the aircraft lags, no matter how good the airframe looks. And finally, production at scale. Building one prototype is hard. Building dozens or hundreds of aircraft on schedule with consistent quality is much harder. This is where many ambitious programs slow down dramatically. History gives us a clue about what this means. Based on past development cycles, especially India's own experience with complex aerospace projects, AMCA is unlikely to appear quickly. Even optimistic timelines point toward the late 2030s or beyond before meaningful numbers enter service. Now place that on the timeline next to Pakistan. Pakistan may begin operating fifth-generation fighters in the 2020s. That means pilots gaining experience, tactics evolving, and integration improving, while AMCA is still moving through design, testing, and early production. This isn't a judgment, it's a reality of timing. And timing matters more than people realize. In Airpower, arriving late doesn't just mean missing a deadline. It means entering a battlefield that has already changed. Tactics are different, threats are different, expectations are different. By the time AMCA becomes operational, it may be facing not the aircraft it was designed to counter, but the next generation beyond that, which leads to a bigger, more strategic question. One that goes beyond aircraft and into national ambition itself. This is where the story zooms out, away from individual aircraft, and into the long-term picture. India has openly stated ambitious goals for the future. By the middle of this century, it aims to be a major global power, not just economically, but politically and strategically. That vision includes a massive economy, global influence, and a military that can operate far beyond its borders. On paper, that trajectory looks bold, and not unrealistic. But here's the paradox. Military technology doesn't move in neat, linear steps. It moves in waves. And countries that miss one wave don't just fall behind temporarily. They often spend the next decade trying to catch up while the world moves on again. By the time AMCA is expected to enter service in meaningful numbers, China may already be transitioning towards sixth-generation concepts, aircraft designed to work closely with AI, drones, and space-based sensors. These systems focus less on dogfighting and more on controlling the entire battle space. Pakistan, meanwhile, wouldn't stand still either. If it successfully operates fifth-generation aircraft in the 2020s and 2030s, upgrades would follow. Better sensors, better engines, new weapons, tighter integration with Chinese systems. So AMCA may arrive into an environment that looks very different from the one it was designed for. That's the uncomfortable reality. The question then becomes not will AMCA be advanced? Because it probably will be. The real question is, will it arrive in the right era? Airpower history is full of examples where capable platforms arrived too late to dominate. Not because they were bad, but because the battlefield had already shifted. This creates a tension between national ambition and technological timing. Wanting superpower status is one thing. Building and fielding the tools for that status, on schedule, is another. And that tension brings us to the final takeaway of this entire discussion. Because in the end, this race isn't really about pride, online arguments, or headline comparisons. It's about time. When you step back and look at the full picture, a clear pattern emerges. Pakistan is on the verge of a near-term leap into fifth-generation air power, not decades from now, but within the same decade we're already in. That leap isn't happening in isolation. It's backed by China's industrial scale, political alignment, and growing confidence in exporting its most advanced systems. For China, this is strategic. For Pakistan, it's transformational. India, meanwhile, faces a much harder challenge. Not because it lacks ambition, talent, or resources, but because advanced air power punishes delay more than almost anything else. Long development cycles, shifting requirements, and late induction all add up to one thing: lost time. Rafale strengthens India's Air Force today. Indigenous programs aim to secure tomorrow. But the gap between today and tomorrow is where pressure builds, especially when rivals move faster. This isn't a story about who is better or who should feel proud. It's a story about timelines. Air dominance in the 21st century isn't defined by a single aircraft. It's defined by how quickly a country can field new technology, learn from it, improve it, and move on to the next stage before others catch up. That's the real race. So the question isn't whether India can build a fifth-generation fighter. It's whether it can compress decades of development into years, and do so repeatedly. Because if it can't, South Asia may enter a new era where air-power balance isn't what it used to be, not because of one dramatic defeat, but because of something far quieter and more dangerous, falling behind while the world moves on. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think timelines matter more than raw capability? Can late starters still dominate in a world of fast-moving military technology? And what actually defines air superiority today? Aircraft, systems, or strategy? Drop your thoughts below. Let's discuss.